Me and hear me okay? Testing 1, 2. So we're going to be doing some Monday guitar motivation. I was out of town last Monday, so I apologize for that. And today what we're going to be doing is talking about some guitar basics, real basic things. I get a lot of requests for this sort of thing, so we're going to talk about this because I'm going to be going live again at 10 a.m. Pacific, and I'm going to be talking about some soloing stuff, all that sort of thing. So I thought today what might be nice is to just talk about some basic stuff. Hello, Brian. How are you? I see Brian is here and Jerry is here. Hey, Jerry. So we're going to be just talking about some basic fundamentals this morning for those people that sometimes think I need to bring down the conversation a little bit, and I totally agree. Nothing wrong with that at all. Hey, Rashad is here, Johnny is here, Samuel is here, Ronald is here, Felipe Solonia Luardo is here. Good day. Dean is here, Christopher is here, David Mason, Christopher, another Christopher. Awesome. Good to hear Brian. Brian's fine. That's good. Eugene is here, Andrew is here, Martin is here. Hey, everybody, thank you so much. And we've already got 300 people, looks like almost 300 people. So we'll just go ahead and get started. But thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So what we're going to do this morning is just to kind of start off and get going. Again, I want to do some basic fundamental things too, so everything isn't just about soloing and whatever. Now, let me know if you can hear my acoustic okay. I'm not miking it, that way you can see it, so I'm just running it direct right now, so hopefully you can hear it all right. Patrick says, you're awesome, Steve. Patrick, you're awesome. Hello, Erica. Okay, cool. So it sounds like you can hear me okay. Perfect. Okay, well, today what we're going to do, and over the next few Monday Guitar Motivations, I'm going to try and keep the conversations, again, more fundamental. Okay, whether I use acoustic or electric or whatever, that's what I'm going to be using. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some essential skills to try and make your chords sound better and your chord changes feel better, okay? So we're looking for sound and we're looking for feel here. And you know, these kind of conversations are really what got me into teaching guitar in the first place, is just really learning to think about how you do these sorts of things. Because when I first started playing, I remember, I don't remember if I learned it from a teacher or if I learned it from a friend or what, I can't remember, but I remember starting bar chords and thinking that my guitar journey was over. And I'm not even exaggerating. I hated bar chords, I couldn't play them, and it just, I couldn't figure out how to put my hand on there and you know, make the chords work, and I couldn't get all the notes to work, and I just hated them. And like I tell students all the time, at some point, I just woke up one day and grabbed my guitar, and it worked. It didn't work and didn't work and didn't work, and then all of a sudden it worked. And so I always tell people, learning how to play guitar, like so many things in life, isn't really like climbing a hill. Right? It's not like every day you get a little bit better, you get a little bit further. You really don't. There are times where you get stuck on a plateau. I mean, you're just sitting there and it feels like you're not getting anywhere. And it can be very, very frustrating because you're like, well, why am I even doing this if I'm not getting better? And then all of a sudden, it'll pop up, right? All of a sudden, you'll elevate and you'll get whatever it is. But it takes time. And the most important thing with guitar playing is that you don't set yourself up for constant failure. And I know we maybe don't do that consciously, but we do it subconsciously a lot, where we try and overshoot with our playing. We try too hard to move too fast. And that's when we run into problems. So I thought this would be a really great conversation to have real quick here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to tell you about when it comes to playing guitar is the guitar itself and the strings, okay? This makes an incredible difference in your playing. If you were here in my studio right now and you were playing my acoustic, you'd go, wow, it's really easy to play. Because it is. And that's done on purpose. I purposely have my guitar set up so they're easy for me to play. I don't really want to fight with my guitar. And the reason I say that is a couple things. When I first started playing, again, my very first experience with playing guitar was an acoustic guitar back when I was about 9 years old. And it failed miserably. I lived out in the middle of nowhere in a very, very small town. And I didn't have a teacher. I had a book. It was a Mel Bay book, but I still didn't understand anything that was going on in the book. You know, I knew nothing. I didn't even understand what a chord was, and I'm trying to figure this stuff out, and so it was just miserable. But the other thing that was really terrible about it was that the strings were about that far away that far away from the neck, right? They were just really far away. And, I would just struggle with trying to push these strings down. And of course, the strings had never been changed or hadn't been changed in years. It was just an old family guitar, that sort of thing. And it was very disheartening. And again, that was my first time trying to play. And I don't really count it my first time because it was so terrible that it didn't last. And then when I was 13, that's when I started actually playing guitar and kind of figuring things out. And I was reminded of this last week because there was somebody that I ran into that's trying to learn how to play, and they had the same problem. The strings were they brought their guitar over to me, and I was looking at it, I was going to give them some tips on playing, and I was looking at the guitar going, first of all, you got to do better, okay? And I'm not saying that everybody's got a ton of money. That's not what I'm saying, but I am saying you can go to a local guitar store and buy a guitar that plays pretty darn well for couple $100. And I'm not saying that that's not a lot of money, but if you're going to try and set yourself up for a successful journey, you got to have something that plays decent. So if you've got a guitar that came from an uncle, that came from an uncle, that came from a grandpa, that came from a whatever, and those strings that guitar is set up terribly, you might want to give consideration to getting something that fits you a little bit better and feels a bit more comfortable. With modern technology, even the stuff that comes off, very much so, the stuff that comes off the assembly line, feels really good. You can go buy a very inexpensive Yamaha guitar or something like that doesn't cost you a lot of money but feels really good. Second thing I want you to think about, and then we'll get to the other stuff, are the strings that you're using. Where again, maybe it's different now, I don't know, but when I was growing up, it just seemed like everybody was always saying, well, you got to use thick strings. The thicker the strings, the better the tone. Okay, that might be true, but if you put strings on there that are very, very uncomfortable for you, sure, you might have great tone, but you can't play it, right? And I've never been about that mentality. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, I'm just saying it's never been my mentality. I want to put strings on my guitar that feel good, that make me play the way I want to play. So right now what I've got on here, these are Martin, what are they called again? The ones that, maybe somebody out there can help me, but they're the ones that Tommy Emmanuel uses. The flexible core, that's what they're called. So these are Martin flexible core, which basically means that they're steel string, but some of the strings have a flexible core on the inside, and it makes it easier to play those. I'm a small human, and my fingers are small, and it just feels better for me to play the flexible core. That doesn't mean that it's something that you would want, okay? But it's something that feels very good to me. So I can play an 11-gauge string on here, which is what these are, but because they're flexible core, they feel very comfortable to me. So don't think that there's only one choice for a string. And again, I know if you're new to this, you don't know what to ask for. You don't know what you don't know. But that's why the more you do some research, or maybe if you've got a good guitar store, somewhere where you live, you can talk to people about this sort of thing. But I just remember, I worked at a music store for many years, 20 years, probably even longer. And I just remember this mentality that people would have, that you were supposed to use just these really thick strings all the time for a better guitar tone. And, and then I would see these guitars with the strings this far away from the neck and think this poor, 9-year-old kid's supposed to play on this. You don't want to set yourself up for failure before you ever get started. So guitar setup, guitar itself makes a big difference, and certainly the strings that you're using. Now, I see people are mentioning intonation. That's another thing that's very important. If you're a beginner, maybe you're worried about intonation a little bit less, because we're worried more about putting our fingers on the strings. If I get a group, sometimes I teach beginner guitar classes where I live, and if I teach a class, the first thing when people come in that I check is, their guitar. Does it look like it's going to fit the player, right? Whether they're a tall player or a short player or whatever it might be, and how playable is the actual guitar. So for brands and things like that, I think they're all fine. It doesn't matter what brand you play. That's again, further down the line. I think the most important thing is the thickness of the string and the feel of the string. And again, don't get too crazy about it, because it's like, well, which battery should I use in my wah pedal? And I think I can tell the difference between a Duracell and a what. That's not really what we're talking about. We're just talking about trying to make the guitar playable. Then we'll deal with quality of tone and all those things further down the line. But the first thing is the playability of the instrument. The tone would be second. Tuning, very important. But again, if it's somebody who hasn't been playing very long, less important than And I'm not saying those aren't important. Of course they're important. But the playability is the first thing I want you to think about. Okay, so let's keep going now. So the next thing is once I go to start playing these chords, somebody has shown me a chord to play. A chord is a bunch of notes at the same time. It's really what a chord is. So I've learned it on a video or in a book or by my teacher or whatever it is. So I learned how to play a chord. So maybe the first chord I learned how to play is an A chord, right? So A, what I'm doing here is I am playing, and again, we're not going through all these chords right now, but just to show you. So I'm playing an A chord here. I'm pressing on the second fret of the second, third, and fourth strings. And I want to play these bottom 5 strings right here. I want to strum those 5 strings. So we're going to get to the strumming in just a second here, but let's talk about the chord itself. So the first thing you have to understand when you're going to make that chord, okay, you have a couple of options. Even though the book that you're reading or the person that you're learning from or the video or whatever tells you a certain way, which is perfectly fine, there's a couple of options. So, for instance, when I first learned how to play the A, and I still do this quite frequently, I would learn how to play with these 3 fingers, my first, my second, and my third fingers, pressing on these 3 strings. Now, needless to say, the A chord itself is a hard chord to fit all those fingers in because you're trying to fit 3 fingers in 1 fret over these 3 strings, and then you're trying not to touch the 5th string, and you're trying not to touch the 1st string. Okay? So, depending on the size of your hand, hello mother, my mom is out there, depending on the size of your hand when you play, you might play in this A chord using these 3 fingers. Feels wonderful, which is perfect, okay? But if it doesn't, another option that you could try is to use these 3 fingers instead, because your third finger and your pinky are going to be a little bit smaller, so they may fit a little bit better. You see? They might fit in there a little bit better as you play this A chord, okay? Now, I remember, I was telling this story, but I remember having an NDSU football player. We have a college up here, North Dakota State University, and I had an NDSU football player that was taking guitar lessons, and of course, this person is probably almost twice the size of me, right? 1 finger is the size of 3 fingers of mine, and really great guy, but he was learning how to play, and I don't know what it's like to be that large of a human. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum over here. So we're learning about chords, and I've always learned through all the students I've had, very diverse students, age and a million other things that can make us diverse, that we're not all built the same, and we can't approach the same things exactly the same way. So this is why I'm telling you this. So with this particular student, playing with these 3 fingers was impossible. Playing with these 3 fingers was impossible. There was no way he was going to fit those fingers in there. So what we went to was trying to figure out, could he use just 2 fingers to press on 3 strings? Now you can see the issue when you get to this point. When he starts pressing with 2 fingers on 3 strings, this first string may no longer work for him. And ultimately what we wound up doing for him is we wound up playing with just 1 finger, not because he chose to, but because he had to, because the size of his hand was so big that in order to play this A chord, he had to use his first finger to press on those 3 strings. Now, here's the reality of the situation. Is he going to make his A chord sound exactly like my A chord with using just 1 finger? Maybe, but maybe not. So, what's his choices? Quit playing guitar because he can't make his A exactly the same way I do and make it sound the way I do. Or B, deal with the fact he's got to play it differently and enjoy playing guitar. That's it. Those are the choices. So, needless to say, learn to continue playing and dealing with the fact that that's how he plays is what he's got to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? So if that makes sense, that's the first thing, is understanding that sometimes when we make chords, we might make them a little differently. You know, G is just a prime, beautiful example. Some people make G like this. Some people make G like this. Some people make G like this. Some people make G like this without this finger and they deaden this string. I make G all of those ways for different reasons, but I've been playing for a while, right? Now, next week, we're actually going to talk a little bit more about those chords and things like that I'm going to help you with. But today, again, I want to stay on fundamentals and trying to make these better. So that's the second thing. The first thing is the setup of the guitar. The second thing is that you may wind up making those guitar chords a little differently than somebody else for a particular reason. You know, I've had people that, for instance, have been in accidents and one of their fingers doesn't work anymore, or they're born without a certain finger, or they were in an accident and a finger is missing. I mean, there's a million things. That doesn't mean you can't play. It just means you have to readjust to make it work the way that works best for you. You might start off by playing it the way that your teacher tells you, and I think that's probably a good idea. But if your teacher is a quality teacher, they're going to acknowledge that something isn't working and think, well, is there something else that we can do, right? Is there some other way that we can make this work? And that's all I'm telling you. So I'm not trying to go against anybody's advice. I'm just trying to be honest with you. So now, the next thing is once you've developed the chord, you've started making whatever chord it is. Again, I'll just go to this A chord again. So you've started making this A chord. So the first thing you start doing is you try to make sure that your wrist is in a bit of a downward position, okay? Because the most important thing here is that you try and press on the strings that you do want, and you avoid the strings that you don't want to touch, but you do want to ring out. On the A chord, we want to ring out the first string and the fifth string. We want those to ring out while we're pressing on the second, third, and fourth strings here. So if I'm doing this, the problem is, oftentimes I'll start deadening this out. So if I can lower the wrist down, usually I tell people kind of put the thumb, you know, kind of in the center here. I know you can't really see that, but kind of in the center. You know, if your thumb, you know, if you have really big hands, you're going to have to readjust a little bit. But think about, you know, don't have your thumb way over here or, you know, way over here or something like that. Kind of have it behind where you're squeezing your fingers. Okay, keep that wrist down a bit. Hey, Carl. You see? So you're keeping that wrist down a little bit. All right? So that's the first thing, is making sure that you do that. Again, whatever fingering that you're using for this chord, but just keeping that wrist down a little bit. Okay? The thing you don't want to have happen when you're playing is that the guitar, the strings, all that sort of thing are forcing you to play with the most strength that you need to be able to squeeze those strings down. You shouldn't have to use that kind of power. I mean, if I show you this, I'm going to press down on this A chord and not even use my thumb. You see? So you shouldn't have to use so much force to try and press on these strings. You want to save that energy for playing for an hour or whatever it might be, right? So as you practice, you want to make sure that wrist is in a bit of a downward position, okay? Now, as I'm playing, I want to make sure that I'm getting all my notes to work. This is not the Rock Licks video, Noah. That's coming at 10 a.m. Pacific, so that's still 3 hours from now, so... Okay, so as I'm playing through that, I'm trying to make sure that I'm pressing on the proper string. The only finger that should be touching that string is whatever's assigned. You don't want to touch any other strings, so that's why my wrist is down a little bit. So I've got some space underneath here to be able to play. Okay, now as you're doing that, remember, the closer you get to the oncoming fret, the closer you get this way to the oncoming fret without touching it, without pressing on top of it, the better and easier it's going to be to make that sound. So for instance, if I go to the second fret here and I press down that direction instead, it's going to be hard to get the sound. I'm going to have to press harder. If I move over this way and get right next to that fret, I don't have to press very much at all and get the sound I'm looking for. Now if I move just a little bit further this direction, now all of a sudden the sound sounds deadened because I'm on top of this actual fret wire. I don't want to be on top of that. I want to be back just a little bit right here. But you see that? The closer I get this direction, the easier I'm going to get that sound. Now A is kind of a struggle because trying to fit 3 fingers in there, it forces these top fingers to move further back. Okay? So again, chords are a struggle. It just takes time to get used to, but if you use a little bit lighter string and you have a good setup on your guitar, that chord will be less of a challenge than it would be if you were using super thick strings and the guitar was set up terribly, right? You want to make sure you've got it set up as best you can. But listen, all chords, I just remember chords being very difficult when I first started playing, you know, trying to train this. So that's the next thing we want to talk about. So with this A chord, I've learned how to do it. I'm trying to work on the sound, you know, setting my wrist in the right position, all that sort of thing. The next thing I want to do, okay, is practice a technique called bouncing. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to try and develop muscle memory between our brain and our fingers. We're going to train ourselves by taking the fingers and picking them up and then setting them back down, and picking it up and setting it back down. Because basically what you want to do with these chords is you want to try and develop them to a point where you don't really have to think about it. Like, you don't want to look every time and go, because if it takes you that long to make the A chord, you're never going to be able to play a song, right? Because the song will be 4 measures in and you're still trying to figure out the first chord and the first measure. So, and that's okay, we've all gone through it. I'm just saying that what you need to do is practice bouncing. And bouncing is, you don't even worry about picking or strumming, it doesn't make any difference. You're just practicing picking your hand up. You're training yourself to make this shape, whatever shape it is. So for instance, if I was making a G chord, right? So G for me, when I want G, here it is. What I do is I pick my fingers up, there's G right there. And I set it down. So if I was put my hand on my lap and I wanted to make a G, you'll watch as I pick my hand up, there's my G. See, I've already made the chord. I'm not getting to the guitar and then reshaping to build this chord. I pick it up and I make that chord and set it down. So if I want G or D or C or whatever it might be, or A or E minor or whatever, right? I can, as I'm moving, my fingers are making the shape that I want. And it's those seconds or less than a second, the amount of time it takes you to get from point A to point B is all the difference in the world between playing a song and not being able to play it, right? So when I first started playing again, I would look at the book and look at the picture and then I would try and make it. Well, the thing is, I've got to move it off the page. I can't sit and stare at that picture. I've got to think, G, can I see it in my head? Or A, or whatever it is you're trying to learn. Can I see it in my head? Can I see it on my fretboard? And if I can, what I need to do is train this hand to make that chord by picking it up and setting it down, and picking it up and setting it down over and over and over. You see? So I just train myself. And it's not the most exciting thing, but you have to keep telling yourself that 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I don't know, whatever it is, you're going to be playing guitar. You're going to be doing all this, right? But you've got to get there first. So you try and pick your fingers up, you set them down, pick them up, set them down over and over and over. And train yourself to do that. And don't make it into some sort of weird contest where you have to, like, you know, you have to do this as fast as you possibly can. Or, you know, people who do it and watch TV and then all of a sudden, like, they're doing this and they're not. The goal with practice all the way around is you don't have to spend 3 hours practicing if you don't have it. But whatever time you do have to practice, focus. Give 100% of your time to that moment of practice. That's how you can get the most out of whatever time you've got. I'm not saying 5 minutes is going to get you there. I'm not saying 5 hours is going to get you there. Everybody's different. But whatever time you do, don't spend half of it on the phone and half of it watching TV and half of it trying to make a chord and then you go out and do something else. When you're practicing, okay, give it your all. Focus on what you're trying to do. So if you're making this D chord, think about it. Look at it. Think about it. Imagine it in your head. And then practice picking your fingers up and setting them down over and over and over, and just train yourself to do that. It doesn't matter if you're doing bar chords, same thing. It doesn't matter. Or if you're practicing scales, right? You just do them over and over and over in your mind, and with your hand, you make those chords or those scales or whatever over and over and over. Bringing your strum back in is a different thing entirely. And see, I didn't understand that when I was a kid. If I make A, strumming, the A chord has nothing to do with the strum. It's like two different, you know, hemispheres of your brain. When I make the A chord, now I can strum all I want, but the A chord is created, right? So trying to do this is one of the worst things, in my opinion, you can do, is try to do this. You see, because how is that ever going to merge, right? The only way I can get that concept to merge is I've got to practice A and D and G. This strum has nothing to do with what's going on with my left hand, with my picking or with my fretting hand, right? As I play, this fretting hand has got to know what it wants, because I really can't think about these two things at the same time. Okay, especially in the beginning stages. Okay, when you multitask, what you're really doing is kind of overseeing everything. You're just generalized overseeing. You can't really focus on 6 things at once. You can't. That's the downside to multitasking, is you can do lots of things, but none of them are getting done at a high level. You see? So think about that a little bit when you're practicing these things. So hopefully that helps you. Think about the guitar that you're using. Think about your approach to these strings, the wrist placement, the elbow, that sort of thing for making these chords. And then think about doing that bouncing where you pick your fingers up and you set them back down. And again, don't be in a hurry to be done. Practice it, because once you learn the A chord, you own the A chord or the G chord or whatever it is. Once you truly learn it, we can use the word master, although I don't really use that word. But once you learn it on an absolute level, you own it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can start learning more stuff. But if you kind of know it, I always tell people, if you kind of know something, you kind of don't know something. And that's where the problem is that if we don't really know it, that's where all the mistakes can happen. And certainly if we ever get nervous or something like that, for whatever reason, this whole thing's just going to fall apart. Okay? Your hands are not your friends. That's right, Lorraine. You're absolutely right. Yeah, you got to, and that's the thing is I always tell people too, these two hands, they're not friends. They're not buddies with each other. Okay? They don't care about each other. This hand's got its own thing to do when it's making chords, and this hand's got its own thing to do to make that strum and to make it sound real. But if we don't have, control, it's just not going to work. The whole thing, your brain will shut down and go, I don't understand what you're trying to do. So that's what I want you to think about a little bit this morning, okay? I got to get going. Again, if you want to talk soloing and electric guitar and all that stuff at 10 a.m. Pacific, which... 9 till about 3 hours from now, I'm going to be going live again. I've got a new guitar course coming out called Rock Licks, and I'm going to be talking about soloing, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to join me again, I'll be live again in 3 hours. Otherwise, practice this for the week. If you're, if you've already learned these sorts of things, you can still apply the concepts to what it is that you're practicing, and the most important thing is get it straight in your head and understand that your hands have to be separated. The practice themselves of whatever you're doing, your fretting versus your picking, need to be practiced separately, all right? So everybody take care, have a wonderful day, have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon, okay? And some of you, I'll see you again live